If we truly want the national renewal that we have been promised and that we have wanted for generations, we need a radical new approach. Neoliberalism is obsolete. The same tired doctrines will no longer be sufficient. It is time for radical change. Where did the social catastrophe of our times begin? The rot started from Thatcherism. Public goods were no longer in public hands. Service quality of water, energy, and railways has declined, and one thing has become abundantly clear. Public rights cannot and should not be monetized. People are being enriched upon the suffering of others, just as corporations profited from Nazism, and some today still benefit from the inheritances and rewards of slavery. Nothing really changes, no matter how much things may shift in a different direction. Thatcherism destroyed progressive taxation, and society is now distorted to serve wealth rather than redistribute it. Growth is concentrated in the hands of a few at the cost of our planet. We need a radical change of direction and a recalibration of our priorities. It is clear that market fundamentalism is damaging for society. We need to revive the virtue of the mixed economy and put public goods in public hands. After systematically evaluating where this is viable, here's what I found. Water should not be nationalised. The UK has excellent water quality comparable to other nations and relatively low bills despite issues with infrastructure and sewage discharge. We should instead adopt a public interest model for the industry and impose more stringent regulation, the latter of which has already been addressed by the Cunliffe Review commissioned by Labour. The Cunliffe Review also successfully secured over £100 billion of private investment into water infrastructure. Despite the industry's status as a natural monopoly, there are therefore still justifications for maintaining a reformed private structure. We can cap shareholder dividends and nationalise failing companies on a temporary basis to address the challenges that we face currently. Nationalisation would likely lead to underinvestment and lower allocated efficiency in the future. We also need nationalised bus services controlled by local or mayoral authorities. Mostly, consumers have little choice and face exorbitant fares for poor service. Devolved control of bus services is definitely a better model, as shown by Andy Burnham in Manchester. We should also nationalise public EV charging, a surprising one, but currently there are far too many apps and services, and it is far too confusing for consumers, and this hinders access and restricts the pace of the transition to electric vehicles. One standardized app with one standardized service across the country will power the transition to cleaner roads and cleaner fuels in our cars. Most importantly, we need more social and council housing, a convention that was decimated by Thatcherism. People don't have the security they deserve. We need to return to providing that through the state. Labour is invested in social and affordable housing, but they need to go one step further and change the definition of affordable housing. Currently, affordable housing is 80% of market value, and that needs to be at the very least 50% of market value. The current system is laughable and provides little improvements to access. 80% of market value is still far too expensive for most families. We need to go one step further and make social housing accessible again. We also need to invest in home insulation and heat pumps rather than being captured by the madness of the right, who demand that we abandon net zero and efforts for modernization. The state can play its part in a green industrial revolution to confront the impacts of post-industrialization and revive our northern regions with new avenues for skills and employment. Nuclear energy can provide a backup and act as security to support unreliable forms of renewable energy. The arguments for having natural gas as a backup are therefore ridiculous. When we have nuclear energy, which is relatively clean and only has issues with storage, why should we neglect using it? Because natural gas is an obsolete form of energy now, and we need to power the shift to renewables in a more sustainable manner, and nuclear energy is the path to do so. The Green Party proposes abolishing nuclear energy. This would be a catastrophic policy that renders their policy platform as unworkable and ineffective. If we abolish nuclear energy, then that will only damage the shift to cleaner energy and will undermine their very goals of having a greener economy. Green Party leaders and representatives also regularly oppose clean energy projects and asylum accommodation in their own areas. Green Party hypocrisy and NIMBYism is not the answer to the problems that we face. Whilst housing access is the main issue, house building and planning reform is still action that is necessary to complement fundamental tax changes. It is clear that only Labour is capable of delivering these answers, but it needs to go further. We need to revalue council tax bans and even explore a more fair land value tax system. We need to cut and reform business rates to support enterprise and innovation, a measure that Labour has promised but not yet delivered. Stronger carbon taxes and a fair energy transition. That is what we truly need, not unworkable fantasies that are being offered up as panaceas by populists. Welfare reform is a moral duty, but it is not a means to shore up government revenues. We need to dispel these myths and falsehoods that distort the process of policymaking. Taxation is not a means to raise revenue. It is a means to shape behavior and shape incentives. The government doesn't need tax to fund spending. Therefore, the fiscal rules are arbitrary and unnecessary. The only constraints on government spending are availability of resources and the risk of inflation. Government debt is not a bad thing. It shows confidence in the economy as the government is satisfying demand for bonds by issuing debt and providing investors with safe returns. We can dramatically scale up public investment and fund the vital reforms that we need if the government can retain market confidence by targeting spending in beneficial areas and sufficiently justifying spending. We also urgently need to reform our governance structures. The triad of tragedy, the OBR, Bank of England, and the Treasury are all not fit for purpose, and they contribute to choking progress. We need to scrap the fiscal rules and embrace a new era of radical reforms and public investment. We cannot afford another era of austerity amidst the destruction of our public services and the reduction of the quality of service that we are receiving. Monetary policy is also often too distant from government, and it is not coordinated enough with fiscal policy. It is also proven to be relatively ineffective for combating inflation due to the time lag and preemptive nature of decision making. We need to give the government greater control and seriously reconsider central bank independence. We need our politicians to take responsibility for decisions rather than outsourcing them to technocrats. The OBR needs to be a verifier of Treasury forecasts rather than a supreme overlord. It's time to reshape the state and reevaluate all that we take for granted in our assumptions about the economy. The question is, if resources are finite yet abundant, why have the government and the lower classes been excluded from accessing them? If we want to give government more power to shape the economy and social outcomes, we need to look at fairer distribution. We need to curtail excess as a moral obligation and to address inflation. The urgency of a wealth tax cannot be understated, but it won't solve everything. We need fundamental tax reform. This means raising capital gains tax and taxes on assets and cutting taxes on income to give working people the same conditions as wealthy people. Then we will see who is truly successful from their hard work. If salaried income is taxed less than assets and related income, obscene levels of inequality are inevitable, and we can see that in society today. We need a cap on wealth and total net worth as well, which I would propose to be £20 million per person. Beyond a certain level, more wealth cannot yield any improvements to happiness and quality of life, and beyond that point, there are adverse social effects. Beyond that point, wealthy people are taking away assets from common people. They're buying second houses. They're buying further improvements to quality of life that don't actually enhance their happiness. Or they're investing into assets and taking away the ability of ordinary people to access them. They're also hoarding wealth. And that is not a productive use of the wealth that we have in society. It becomes concentrated and it becomes dormant. And that is damaging for the economy as well as for wider society and the levels of equality that we need. The extreme wealth that is created is not merely immoral, it also has political effects. Extreme wealth has distorted democracy. Political donations have doubled since 2001. And this is why policy favors the wealthy so much. This is why our tax system is so severely distorted. The lobbyists are running our country, and working people are being left behind. Labour needs to reclaim their original values and listen to the voices of working people, listen to the grassroots of the party, rather than listening to lobbyists and business groups that pressure them into distorting the tax system even further. They need to grasp the problem by the nettle and make sure that wealth taxation is shored up in the budget tomorrow. I have little hopes from the budget tomorrow, but we do need a radical redistribution. And that means taxing assets and curtailing excess so that working people are able to access them again, so that working people have a house rather than the uber elite having multiple houses. Inequality has increased surreptitiously. Poverty down, extreme wealth up. Do not let this fool you. Relative poverty has got worse despite extreme poverty declining, because extreme poverty is largely a baseless measure based on very low standards, $2 per day. Extreme poverty reductions cannot legitimately justify capitalism and its discontents. We need to tackle inequality to deal with poverty. They are not standalone issues, they're intrinsically linked. And we need to take a more decentralized, devolved, local approach to poverty prevention. Addressing these challenges is our moral duty, and I will not rest until this is achieved. We also need to consider how we can give working people a stake in their future and in their communities. We need local and national citizens' assemblies. Local citizens' panels would adjudicate on local issues and advise local government decision-making, whilst assemblies would advise national government. There would be a statutory requirement for the government to take action on the recommendations that they would give. Referendums are an obsolete democratic instrument. These assemblies would be far more effective. The assemblies would have a diversity of identity, experiences, and opinion to represent the wide range of views across a local community. We need a cap on political donations as well, so that democracy is no longer distorted. And we need a long-term shift to state funding of political parties to eliminate the undue influence that donations can cause. It's time to reclaim democracy from corporate capture. If we do not do this, then the distortions that are present today will become even more pervasive and entrenched in the future. Another big question that the budget would present is, what should the government fund? Released from the arbitrary constraints of fiscal rules, the government can fund urgent social priorities. We can reduce tuition fees for universities and fund crumbling finances simultaneously, because it is an investment in our future, and we need to value our universities that are centers of learning, education, and research. They power the innovation of our future, and we need them if we want the growth that we need desperately. Concurrently, we also have to manage the problem of overeducation. We need to give equal value to the vocations and to university qualifications, and the new V-levels and increased apprenticeship funding should help in achieving that. We need to also fund universal free dentistry to prevent the decline in health outcomes that we are seeing. And we need one free eye check per year for adults, because healthcare is a right, not a privilege. The NHS was established upon that principle, and that principle is being eroded by privatization that is inadvertent and under the surface, but is still happening. You see how dentistry has become privatized, you see how optometry has become privatized. Who's to know what is next? We need to maintain that principle as a tenet of public policy, and ensuring that people have access to eye care and dental care is the first step towards recognizing that this principle is still essential in the world today. We also need to support small businesses to encourage enterprise and innovation by cutting the corporation tax small profits rate. We need to provide more free childcare hours and increase the threshold from £100,000 to ensure that the middle classes don't lose out from means testing. We need higher sin taxes to maintain public health and end the scourge of smoking and alcoholism in society. Vaping is also becoming an increasingly pervasive social problem, and we do not yet know the full impacts, the health impacts and the social impacts that it can cause. It is an urgent public health priority to crack down on rogue vape sellers and drug dealers by extension, to stop our young people from being led down the wrong path. We cannot lose the next generation. We need to build the future, not destroy it. Another measure that I would recommend is a levy on Premier League transfers. The Premier League is rife with dirty money and extreme transfer fees, and the effects of that need to be addressed. Income tax thresholds and rates also penalise workers unnecessarily. £150,000 is no longer an amazing salary for a family. £200,000 as a threshold for the additional rate would be much fairer and would help stop the erosion of middle-class wealth. A £20,000 personal allowance, lower rates at each band, and an end to personal allowance withdrawal for high earners would finally create a system with fair and proportionate marginal tax rates that supports people into work rather than penalise them. Dividend taxes also need to increase to incentivize investment rather than payouts and bonuses to executives, and to create a level playing field between workers and investors. To destroy the inheritocracy that creates unfair advantage, we need to raise inheritance tax thresholds to only impact the wealthiest rather than the middle classes and to reflect higher house prices. Currently, the threshold is far too high considering how high house prices have become. This needs to be reformed. We also need to shut down loopholes to ensure that everyone pays their fair share. Employers' national insurance needs to be cut to support businesses and hiring. There's a graduate jobs desert. Many people with qualifications are unable to attain the employment that they need and deserve. People should have access to the career path that they want. Tax reform is the only way that we can achieve that. Overall, tax reform is essential if we want to achieve the social priorities that we are setting out to achieve, if we want to improve social outcomes for everyone across society, and if we want to restore meritocracy, tax reform is the only way that we can reshape social outcomes to ensure that this reality is a truth, not a fantasy. Often, budgets and policy desperately chase economic growth, and this objective still persists today. But growth is a means to an end, not the final goal. Growth needs to be directed towards social priorities like reducing poverty, and it is clear that you cannot tackle poverty without tackling inequality. Technological innovation is the crucial ingredient for starting this process, so AI and net zero is where our focus should be concentrated. To encourage innovation, growth, and technological progress, we also need to reform intellectual property laws, which are outdated and restrictive. We need legislation to allow idle patents to expire so that people can use them to create the products and services of the future. The Patent Office also needs to be better equipped financially to improve administration of these patents. We also need to reform the stock market to stop our innovative companies being destroyed by foreign buyouts. It's time to scrap the futile stamp duty reserve tax and protect infant industries through subsidies, interest-free loans, and expanded grants and startup capital via the British Business Bank. Greater investment in science and technology is also imperative, and Labour has provided the biggest investment on record. But it's not enough. We need to make reform a priority as well as funding to ensure that we have the innovation to power the growth of the future. As part of the growth agenda, we need radical reform of the school curriculum to encourage critical thinking and to reduce disillusionment with education. Education should be an enjoyable and engaging experience, not something which is forced upon students, not something which restricts their choice and freedom, not something which traps them into one way of thinking. It should be dynamic and effective in the way that it is constructed. Labour has made progress with the Becky Francis Review, but not enough. Education reform is critical for reducing inequality and encouraging social mobility. Opportunity needs to be distributed across the country to diminish the iniquitous effects of social zoning, which hurts working people. Rather than shirking our responsibility to tackle the effects of globalization, we need to take responsibility for global impacts and effects on the North and Midlands. We can prevent technological unemployment if we change the incentives that are on offer. Labour is taxed far more heavily than capital, so capital acts as a substitute rather than a complement to labour. We either reduce the cost of hiring or increase the cost of automation. The latter is detrimental for productivity and growth, so we need to make hiring cheaper, not just to benefit businesses and investment, but also to benefit working people with greater access to employment and protection from technological unemployment. We need to find innovative solutions to the productivity problem, including consideration of a 4-day working week. We cannot be restricted in the way that we think about these things. The path to sustainable and inclusive growth and higher productivity is in front of us, and we cannot relinquish the opportunity to seize it. We have to abandon the scourge of capital fundamentalism, an ideology that governments pursue far too frequently. HS2 and a new Heathrow terminal will not solve our economic problems. Fundamental reform of the system will. AI and green technologies will also be crucial for inducing the creative destruction that we need to reshape society and to offset diminishing returns and declining productivity in established systems. However, current powerful industries like big tech need to be more effectively regulated. Despite all of this, GDP increases are not the goal that we want to pursue, and the narrow nature of this measure is restrictive for public policy. We need a new approach. We need a new goal to aspire to. We need to consider a combination of economic indicators, not just the narrow GDP measure. And I would cautiously endorse the economic dashboard proposed by Daniel Susskind. This would mean abandoning the pretense that scaling up arms manufacturing to create growth will improve our lives. We need to consider holistic measures, and that will include considering the fact that arms spending is detrimental for the world and society at large. We need to stop legitimizing the killing of innocent people. We need to stop rewarding it. Now is the time to scrap the unethical and unjustifiable British nuclear program and invest in cybersecurity to guard against the real threats that we will face in the future. We need a defensive military that keeps the peace, not an aggressive military that encourages the oppression and aggression that we see worldwide. Good growth and an end to GDP fanaticism is no longer just a dream, but an achievable reality that we can strive towards. Universal credit also needs to be more effective for encouraging people into work. The taper rate needs to be cut, the work allowance needs to be raised, and the waiting period needs to be reduced from the absurdly long 5 weeks that it currently is. Housing benefit needs to be unfrozen to support homeless people, and disability benefits need to be higher to help people appropriately manage the costs of disabilities. To solve the NEET crisis, we also need to increase access to work funding and seriously consider economic proposals for a job guarantee. The government could guarantee work for shortage occupations to long-term unemployed people. The Centre for Social Justice has also proposed a future workforce credit. 30% of hiring costs for long-term needs would be covered by the state for a limited amount of time to support entry into the workforce. We need innovative solutions to entrenched problems. We can build a fairer welfare system whilst keeping people out of poverty. Welfare reform does not have to be cruel and vindictive. More cuts and more austerity is not the answer to the problems that the system faces. The UK today faces a very difficult economic situation, but progressive solutions and radical ideas are ready and waiting to confront these issues. For too long, we have avoided examining aspects of the system that have always been the same, just because that's the way things are. It's time to embrace a new economy. Progress, not stagnation. Advancement, not decline. It's time to build our future and create the national renewal that we deserve.